pase, pierna derecha, directo al arco, ¡golazo! ¡Golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
And good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today for Friday, September 15th, 2017. Geez, it's already September. Rudy, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm enjoying this very un-September weather in Toronto, so let's keep it up.
It's Rudy Schuler, of course, of the Sporting News. Rudy, it's just Rudy. It's like a Brazilian footballer. I think you're probably okay with that. You should byline it just Rudy now, dude.
Yeah,
Rudinho.
Yeah, I'm kind of like Beyonce that way. I just need one name.
There you go. All right, fair enough. Rudy, we when we have Rudy on, we're just sort of going to go around the league. I guess we have a bit of news yesterday. Anthony Jackson-Hamel, who has become a bit of a lightning rod in Montreal this year, signed an upgrade on his contract. Just thoughts on that, thoughts on the young Canadians' season so far, Rudy?
Well, I have to congratulate him on earning that contract, and he did really earn that contract. He's basically been the Impact best striker this year, and it would have been silly if they had let him go or continued to underpay him because he wasn't making that much relative to other MLS strikers around the league. So I'm assuming that he got a pretty good pay bump based on his form this year and at the end of last year as well. And I'm hoping that this will be another motivating factor for him to keep pushing his game because as good as he's been as a substitute, he hasn't really shown that much as a starter. And I think that's the next evolution of his game. So hopefully this gives him another kind of incentive to go out there and go after it because it'll be good for both the Impact and the Canadian national team.
Yeah, well, with the Impact rumored to have been chasing after, more old Italians recently, which doesn't seem to have bore fruit, but nonetheless, that rumor was out there. And you have a lot of Impact fans clamoring to see this kid get more time. Do you think with the Impact, can I say they're out now? They're all but out of that playoff race, I think. Do you think that we'll see them sort of look to the future and give more minutes in the stretch run in to players like AGH?
I don't think they'll do that. I mean, I think he'll specifically get more minutes just because of the dilemma they're in. They don't really have any other strikers that can play that in that role, or play it as well as he can. I don't think they're going to go all throwing the baby out with the bathwater and putting all the youngsters in yet until they're mathematically eliminated. That's just I just don't see that happening. I agree with you. They're probably out. They're most likely out, but they're not mathematically out. So until that happens, I think you're going to see a lot of the same, a lot of the same familiar lineups that we've seen from Mauro Biello, and maybe it'll help. They're playing Minnesota this week, so it should help there at least. But after that, we'll see how the rest of the league goes because they've got a huge uphill climb ahead of them.
We mentioned Anthony Jackson-Hamel, his new contract 2 year with an option on the third. The other young prospect that established himself this year, well, not established, but that broke out this year, is Balou Tabla. Balou's been injured the last 2 days, tonsil infection. It's been really painful. He's been away from training the last 2 days. What are your thoughts with hindsight on Balou Tabla and heading into the last stretch of the season? You're right, they're not out mathematically. Montreal may be the only team. It depends on New England if they win this weekend in Montreal. If one of those two teams wins, then they have a shot maybe at trying to beat the Red Bulls because Atlanta's on a roll now. So what do you think Balou Tabla's role going to be for the rest of the season? And is it a disappointment after his coming-of-age moments of the earlier part of the season?
Well, it's always a bit of a letdown when you have a young player that kind of breaks out. I would say he broke out even last year. He showed flashes of brilliance last year. This year he continued it a little bit more consistently, but it's always a bit of a letdown when those types of players go down to injury. It's something they can't control. It's not it's not form. It's not anything else. It's just you can't control. It's part of the game. But again, it's kind of a learning experience for him because he's going to have to learn to deal with these kind of things because that's just the life of a pro athlete. So. Hopefully, the future doesn't have too many more of these injury breaks because I think that he is in line for a lot of minutes. Honestly, I think he's in line for a lot of minutes regardless of whether they go with the young route or not because, aside from Ignacio Piatti, he's and maybe to a different extent, Blair Jamaili. I think Balou Tabla is probably the only really unpredictable player on the Impact roster, and unpredictable in a good way, in that he can throw opposing defenses off, and he can kind of pull a rabbit out of his hat and make things happen. He's a real game breaker. Obviously not to the level of a Piatti yet, but that's not to say that he can't get there or even close to there. So, to me, he should be playing as many minutes as possible already, even though he's only 18 years old, because he's one of the best Impact attackers. And one of the things that the Impact aren't doing right now is scoring goals. So this is a guy who can help them do that. If not score them himself, then at least open up for teammates.
Enough about okay.
Yeah,
I was going to say enough about the team that's not in the playoffs. Let's talk about top of the East and top of the West. Let's start with Vancouver. I'll leave Toronto for Duane. Vancouver, with their victory midweek, are now top of the Western Conference, looking strong for a Western Conference team with a lot of confidence and momentum heading into the last rest of the season. Are you surprised with Vancouver?
A little bit surprised, but I'm not completely surprised, because we saw in the beginning of the year that they were injury ravaged, and the team wasn't completely finished yet. They looked like they were adding pieces as the entire season went on, and it looked like that was the plan, and that happened to be the plan. That's exactly what happened. And because the West being what it is, they were always going to be kind of in the mix. So they were playing kind of ugly soccer. Maybe not getting all the results they needed, but they were still kind of keeping pace with everybody else. They were never fully out of the conversation for the top of the West. Maybe at the very beginning of the year, but towards the middle of the season and now, they were always within touching distance. They just needed to go on a little bit of a run, which MLS teams tend to do at this time of year. So, they got healthy. They added a few good pieces. Jordi Reyna especially is the one who got healthy and basically became a mid-season addition, even though he was with the team the whole year. And then they brought in some other guys like Bernie Abini and a couple other guys, and the guys that they already had started playing to their potential and started playing to the system that Carl Robinson took quite a while to figure out. It must be said. But now that they all know what they're supposed to be playing, they all know where they're supposed to be playing, and they kind of figured out who their best 11 is, although they're still getting a little bit of a rotation policy going on just because of the heavy schedule. They've started to put it together. And to me, it's not entirely surprising, because I've said at the beginning of this year that they've had the talent to compete in the West. It would just have to ride that early stint out and get the most of that talent until all the injuries kind of heal up and they can add one or two pieces. And that's literally exactly what they did. They're not world beaters by any stretch of the imagination. The West is what it is, but they can only be as good as they are in the West. So they're a team that looks like they're on form now. They're full of confidence, and I think they can take anybody in the Western Conference right now, and that division is theirs for the taking.
Yeah, well, the narrative is going to be, the Cascadia hat trick of MLS Cups is kind of what they've got to be thinking. It'd be the same model that they used if, in fact, they went there. I mean, you sort of touched on it, but continue on. What do you think? I think Vancouver's pretty safe for the playoffs now. What do you think their playoff potential is? Is it really just a coin flip, a multiple coin flip in the West, or is there a dominant team out there that you see?
There's no dominant team yet. I would say that the advantage that Vancouver has is to me, it's the deepest team in the West, and it's actually the second deepest team in MLS. And that bodes well for these, this crazy kind of schedule that they got going on leading into the playoffs, and then also the playoffs as well. It's all about squad rotation and getting the most out of guys. And if a certain player doesn't have a good form, you can replace him with a like-for-like kind of replacement. So that's what Vancouver's got going for them. We saw that last year with TFC, and we're seeing it this year with Vancouver. That's what they've got going for them, and I think that's going to help with them down the stretch. They don't have as many game breakers. I talked about that with Montreal, but they don't have as many game breakers as some of the other Western Conference teams do. They don't have the type of players like a Clint Dempsey, who's a kind of a wily veteran who knows how to do it in this league. Of course, they have Freddie Montero, who's a very similar type of player, but they don't have as many on the roster as a couple of these other Western teams do. But I do think that their depth is their trump card. It's the thing that's going to push them over the edge. And I think they can make a deep run. I've been kind of jokingly saying it for the past few weeks on Twitter that I'm looking forward to seeing the Toronto versus Vancouver final. But with every passing week, it gets more and more realistic. So I do think they have the potential for a very deep run in this playoffs.
I have this vision of MLS headquarters busily crafting up a trophy to give for the third for a third place game that they're going to call the Super MLS Cup or something. Anyway, let's move from there. Let's move to the other side of that equation and move across the country and talk about the team in our backyard, the team that Rudy and I follow most closely and for the longest period of time. TFC, it's hard to really talk about them because there's so much is going right. It's hard to talk about a team that's going right. But one thing I did that has been sort of a conversation of late, and this is sort of being, driven by folks in the States when they're having their MVP conversations or reward conversations. They always talk about this vote split and how TFC can't possibly have an MVP candidate. Is that absurd that we're not talking about a player on possibly the best MLS team of all time getting the MVP? Am I wrong to think that that's a patently absurd idea, that it shouldn't be the MVP, shouldn't be coming from Toronto?
You're not wrong. I wouldn't say you're 100% right either. It's one of those things. It's such a tough thing to debate because MVP means so many different things to so many different people. We had this conversation on Twitter with a couple of the Extra Time Radio guys. I talked about how MVP kind of defaults to whichever team needs that player the most. So it doesn't become MVP. It becomes MVP of a certain team or MVP of who's most valuable to their team, which, that's not what the award says. It's just MVP, the most valuable player in the league. That's what it's supposed to be. So, is Diego Valeri the most valuable player in the league right now? Is David Villa the most valuable player in the league right now? I'm not sure. Is it Sebastian Giovinco? Is it Michael Bradley? Those guys should be in the conversation. Even Victor Vasquez should be in the conversation, to be quite honest. To me, the best team in the league should have representation, at least in the final conversation. So if Sebastian Giovinco or whoever, Michael Bradley or Victor Vasquez or even Josie Altidore, if one of them are not at least in the final ballot, then we know something's gone completely wrong, because you can't have – I agree with you at that point. You can't completely ignore a possible record-breaking team, a team that is an all-time great already and could be the all-time great team by the time we all is said and done. So, to kind of make a long story short, I agree with you mostly, but I do see the other argument. I do see the arguments that, without player X, team Y isn't nearly as good as they are. But, yeah, you could say the same thing for TFC, but they have a lot more of those guys. I don't know if a team should be penalized for the fact that they have done better in bringing in more of those guys than other teams at just bringing one or two.
Okay, I've been doing this for a long time. You've been doing this for a long time. I cannot believe I'm about to ask this next question, Rudy. What will the reaction in Toronto be to the Supporters' Shield win? Will this be something that the fans will embrace and get very excited about, or will it be shrug?
I think the hardcore fan base, which is actually a lot bigger than is let on in Toronto. It's not just the supporters groups. It's most of the season ticket holders, the guys, the men and women that are there week in and week out. I think most of them, for the most part, will embrace it the way they have embraced the Canadian Championship. But in the same way they've embraced the Canadian Championship, they will still feel it's secondary to MLS Cup. And that's just, the North American mentality, is that last trophy on the last day of the postseason, that's the one that matters most. So, soccer, of course, is a different beast, in that most soccer leagues around the world, it's the season champion. There is no regular season or playoffs. It's just the season champion. They are the champion. They are the ones that are revered the most. I think that mentality does kind of permeate a little bit here, but for the most part, it's still the North American mentality. So I do feel that it will be embraced, but it will be embraced as the second best thing they could win this year, not the best.
Toronto has a cushion on top of the league. What does it say for the next few weeks heading into the playoffs? Do you use that cushion to maybe put some players on the bench, maybe some on them in the stands to get them a little bit of rest, or you just part the course?
Well, you're already seeing it. I mean, TFC's in LA right now, and they left Giovinco and Altidore at home. Yes, there's some slight injury concerns, but if this was later on in the year, if this was the playoffs, those guys would be on that plane. They would be already in LA and preparing for that game on Saturday. So we're already seeing Greg Vanney taking precautions, because they know that they need to protect some of the bigger guys and even some of their lesser guys as well. So I feel that even starting against LA, which is a team you can do against, you can have a little bit of rotation, just because it's the longest road trip left in the year, and it's a game that isn't of course, every game is important when you're chasing the Supporters Shield and all the records and whatnot. But it's the one game that you can kind of get away with without putting your absolute best foot forward. And that's not a slight on the LA Galaxy. I think that would have been the same story if the Galaxy were top of the West. I think it's just the fact that it's a Western Conference team. It comes at a time when there's a lot of games coming up. There's 2 more games next week for TFC. So it's something that I think we're going to see a little bit more of. You're not going to see heavy rotation until the Supporters Shield is wrapped up, and maybe even that points record is wrapped up. But you are going to see a little bit more rotation than what we've seen over the past month and a half, 2 months, where we've basically seen Greg Vanney throw out his best 11 every single time. With an exception here or there. You're not going to see that now until I think until October again, when they want to get everyone on the same page ahead of the playoffs. I think this is that kind of weird period where it's still 6 or 7 weeks away from the playoffs. They want to start ramping up, but they don't want to start tiring guys out. So I think you're going to see a little bit of rotation, but not too much. And it starts this week with the 2 big scorers not even on the plane to LA.
When you look at TFC and the way they play, the way they have played this season, heading into the playoffs, do they have to change their ways a bit? Is there anything they have to adjust? Because, last year they were pretty close. They got closer than you can without winning MLS Cup, pushing this thing in penalties. What do they need to do different, or what do they need to do different than this regular season to get that trophy?
Well, I think what we've seen this year in the regular season versus last year is TFC is a lot more ruthless this year. When teams are out against them, when the game is already well in hand, they don't just sit back and allow it to allow the clock to run out. They're still going for goals in the 90th minute. It doesn't matter if it's 3-0, 4-0. They're still going for goals at that point. And I think a lot of that is because of the fact that they didn't score anything against Seattle in that MLS Cup game. And it kind of changed the mentality a little bit. Like, look, we got to get goals whenever we can. It doesn't matter when the game is in hand. The game could not be in hand. It can change on a dime. So I think a lot of that is the mentality that they learned from that playoff run. Other than that, I mean, really, how much do you need to change from a team that's running away with the league? They're going to have to tighten things up at the back a little bit more, which is really weird to say for a team that is the second best defensive team in the league right now. But they know that they're going to have to tighten things up a little bit more at the back, and they're also going to have to they're going to have to learn how to face bunkers more and more, because that's what's going to happen in the playoffs. Teams are going to bunker against them. Of course, we saw it against Seattle. Like, we keep coming back to that game. But I think other teams are going to do that now because they've seen what TFC could do to teams in the playoffs. They saw exactly how Toronto could dismantle an NYCFC team and come back from a huge deficit against Montreal. These are things that other teams have learned, and they're going to be looking for. So they're going to have to learn. If I would have to say anything, they have to learn to play against the bunker a lot more, because that's what's going to happen in the playoffs against them.
I was reading an article on MLSsoccer.com, and I pretty much almost spit my Pepsi out of my mouth when it said that Atlanta United was the first team in MLS history the New England Revolution were the first team in MLS history to complete a whole game without getting a single shot on goal yesterday. I don't know if I think I remember one last December that they forgot to put the regular season title in there, but that does lead to my next question, Rudy. 7-0. I want you to talk about that game a little bit from both sides of it. What does it mean for Atlanta and what they are this year, and what does it mean for New England and what they are, period?
Well, I just want to put a little caveat on that record. I believe the record is for 0 shots of any kind. So Seattle had shots, but didn't have shots on goal. They had a couple of shots that were wayward. There were no saves made by Clint Irwin in that game. There were no shots blocked or anything like that. They literally, New England, I'm talking about now, they literally had any shots in that 7-0 loss, whereas Seattle at least had, I think, 2 or 3 actual shot attempts. So I think that was the difference. But getting back to that game, that 7-0 game in the middle of the week, oh man, what does that mean? It means that Atlanta now, they've already established Mercedes-Benz Stadium as one of the toughest places to play again, and we're going to see a massive crowd on Saturday against Orlando. They're selling out the entire stadium. They've already sold more tickets than the MLS standalone record. They've already pumped their own tires on that, and good for them. Whatever. But this is a team that's, we talk about teams that are coming into form at this time of year. This is one of them, and they're going to have a lot of games to do it. My only doubt on them and I think this is a very dangerous team. It's one of the teams I think that TFC does not want to face in the playoffs. But my only doubt on Atlanta is, are they going to be able to hold up during this insane stretch of home games? Because they're playing Wednesday, Saturday for basically 2 months straight until the playoffs, and then they'll be doing it again because the playoffs come in, and now they're playing better teams and more prepared teams and the best of the best in high pressure situations after coming off that 2 months insane stretch. So are they going to be able to hold up? Because when they do have their best 11 out there, Joseph Martinez firing on all cylinders, Miguel Almiron pulling the strings, and everyone behind him doing what they've been doing all year, they are, to me, the most dangerous team in MLS. I wouldn't say they're the best team in MLS because we all know who that is, but they are the most dangerous team in that they can strike out of nothing. And yes, New England was down 2 men, and I honestly think that they were both good calls. But that's what a team does when they're trying to chase a playoff spot and trying to secure a home field advantage. You put your foot on the neck of the opponent and you squeeze the life out of them. That's exactly what Atlanta did. What does that mean for New England? Well, New England's been this kind of treading water kind of team forever, and it's kind of funny because it's two NFL owners on two opposite sides of the spectrum here. We got Arthur Blank on the Atlanta side, and Robert Kraft on the New England side. And of course, everyone made jokes about that. That was also the Super Bowl matchup. But it's just funny to see how much different their approaches are, and how much different the ownership really seems to care about their soccer teams, because we know that they care about their NFL teams. We know that Robert Kraft loves his New England Patriots, and why not? It makes him a lot of money. It gives him a lot of prestige. But we can see that the New England Revolution aren't even anywhere near the conversation that the type of that Arthur Blank has with Atlanta United. So it's always hard for me to kind of rip on owners that were around from the beginning, because they were the ones who kind of stuck things out. Robert Kraft's been around since day one, but at this point the league has surpassed him, and he's got to do some hard thinking about whether he wants that team to be a perennial all-star or a team that like Atlanta that actually can make some money in an NFL stadium and be a good secondary business to the NFL business, because if there's anything that these rich guys like, is making more money. So why not try to do that with the team that has a lot of potential?
All right, and Rudy, real quickly before we let you go, I want a one-word answer on this. If TFC does not win the MLS Cup, blank will win it.
Atlanta.
Okay, that would be quite the story right there. Rudy Schuler from the Sporting News. Read his stuff. You can follow him on Twitter at his name, at Rudy Schuler. Thanks again, Rudy, as always.
No problem, guys. Talk to you again.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerTodaySPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
And we're back on Soccer Today. Duane, yesterday there was about 10,000 games in the Europa League. I was able to switch channel to a few of them, and I got some Vitesse versus Lazio. That was an interesting game. Lead changed a few times. Lazio got the game winner late. But FC Cologne Arsenal started with Cologne scoring in the opening minutes. Very interesting, but it's what happened outside of the game that's interesting. And yes, there were some unfortunate scenes, but there were more fortunate scenes than unfortunate ones.
Yeah, look, and there's a great article in The Guardian that I retweeted this morning that I encourage everyone to read. It was written by it was a blogger, basically, that was a Cologne blogger that talked about what that game meant to the Cologne fans and why you saw it. If you saw the images yesterday, they were floating around of 20,000 people marching towards the Emirates, which is a lot of people, a lot of Cologne fans, and making a lot of noise, flares, chanting, singing, the whole 9 yards, and relatively peaceful. There was a small group of ultras that tried to storm into the stadium, which caused the delay, and also I think the Arsenal security was a little overwhelmed by how many fans were there without tickets, and that's a triggering thing to the English, and we don't really need to remind you why. There have been some tragedies in the past that maybe some people might argue that they corrected, but it's better to overcorrect than to undercorrect in situations like that. So
but
they
it's true. You remind me of a conversation that I was following yesterday, late actually 2 days ago, on crowd segregation and how it changed in 67 moving forward, and how it actually did not really help. And anyways, but no, it's an interesting aspect.
Yeah, and look, and that's, if you read some of the controversy around it, I mean, there's a couple things. First off, the Cologne fans showed up in massive numbers without tickets, which again is it's Hillsborough, was basically, a lot of that was not caused by it. I want to be careful when I say that, but there was a lot of people there that were trying to get access to a grounds that didn't necessarily have tickets, and then the crowd control around it was terrible. So what they've done is they've compensated for that, and they have very good crowd control now to try and avoid that ever happening again. But when you have a lot of people around a stadium without tickets, it's the English, and rightfully so, tend to get a little bit worried about that. So that's why they delayed it for the hour, to make sure that everyone was safe. And I think that was the right decision. The other controversy, and this is the one where I think you could sort of wonder a little bit about, in a situation like this, whether they might not have figured this out a little bit better ahead of time, is that a lot of Cologne fans were wearing Arsenal. They were buying Arsenal knockoff kits, putting like Arsenal skins on their phones so that they could get into the home end, just so they could be in the stadium. They were buying tickets off scalpers. Now, of course, outside of North America, you can't watch a game outside of your designated section without being removed from the stadium. So this is considered a security risk there. And this is the area where I think many of us in North America kind of have trouble wrapping our head around why it's not okay. Like, we see, I buy tickets. If I went to an Impact game in a TFC strip, I would get a lot of jibe at me. Maybe one or two people might be a bit of an ass, but by and large, I'd be fine. We wander the concourse together as it is right now to use the bathroom and buy food. And that's, as intense a rivalry you're going to get in MLS. So it's hard for us to wrap our head around that. And I think maybe
Montreal-Toronto game in hockey, Duane, the Maple Leaf versus Canadiens. There's no allowed in sections. It's filled half and half sometimes. And there's no problem. And I think what I was mentioning earlier, the segregation of the crowd that happened in 67 in England, after the hooliganism. Yes, hooliganism. After that, because of that, the segregation happened, and it made for a battle line. It made for like an actual front line. That separation creates places in the stadium where there can be confrontation, and where people feel the strength of a crowd, and they can have terrible songs, and it's not going to be stopped. Trying to sing a terrible song that's actually like either is sexist or racist or just of terrible taste by yourself as an away supporter surrounded by home fans. You won't, because you're not going to fear for your, you know what I mean? There's a lot of bad things that came with crowd segregation and came with created battlefront lines, like the ones where you have security guards between away and home supporters, and that battle line is usually where there's a lot of incidents, and that was all created by crowd segregation. So there's a lot of aspects of problems we see sometimes that actually were created by the solution of 1967.
Yeah, well, exactly. And that said, to get back to the game at hand, this is a team that had not been in Europe in a quarter century, in a generation. It's a very well supported team, a team that has been relegated several times, that's sort of been through the ringer, and finally, got back to what is a pinnacle for them. They're not going to win a Bundesliga title. They're not probably going to play in the Champions League, but to draw Arsenal away in the Europa League to the Cologne fans was the pinnacle of their experience. It was something they dreamed of. It was something they didn't think was possible, probably. So they wanted to be there. They wanted to be a part of it. And then to turn around and only get 2,900 tickets when there are 20,000 people that have expressed interest, Arsenal probably could have been a little more flexible in that, and that probably could have eliminated this. If you double that allocation, you're still going to have a lot of people there that choose to come without tickets, but by and large, you're going to accommodate a lot more people. And really, the Europa League is a disappointment for Arsenal. It's the thrill of a lifetime for these fans. That said, I want to get back to that Guardian article real quick. I do encourage you to read it. It sort of puts its spin on it that I think is worthwhile. It talks about how that the majority, like 90%, 95% of the Cologne fans really want to distance themselves from those that were trying to do things that they weren't supposed to do. They just were there to touch it, kind of, to be a part of it in a way that, maybe they knew they weren't going to get in the stadium. They didn't go with the intention to try and force their way into the stadium. They didn't go with the intention to try and manipulate their way or to trick their way into the stadium. They just wanted to touch it, be there, part of that, and be drinking and enjoying life and celebrating their club close to where this game was happening in a foreign city. And they had a great time. And apparently, if you look behind the sort of the glaring headlines, there was a lot of good moments that were happening. And I didn't see a lot of Arsenal fans that were particularly upset with the Cologne fans. I saw even the Arsenal TV guys, they were like, well, fair play to them and yeah. Link the video, and that's a good thing. And that's what football should be at its best.
Arsenal TV fans are not stupid. They know that, look, let's get them on TV and this thing is going to get retweeted by everyone in Germany and Cologne. So why not? And that's what it's all about too, right? It's not about them versus us as well. And the supporters, but you're all supporters of this beautiful sport. So everyone, even though you like different teams, and especially on a match like this, you want to cheer for your camp versus somebody else's camp. But it's all about the game that we all love, right? So we all actually can find ways to get along. And I'm not saying that people don't get along. What I'm saying is you've seen this with New England a few last week in Montreal, when Montreal traveled there. During the game, we're adversaries, but before the game, we can shake hands, share a hot dog, and after the game, we can maybe shake hands and share a beer too. But during the game, we're going to chant against each other. But we do have this correlation between each other that we love the same thing, and that's why we usually find ways to always get along because, well, we understand each other.
All right, a couple quick bullet points to end this, and then we'll wrap and do the games of the week. Another interesting result, another team that hadn't been in Europe in a long time, Atalanta.
Oh, jeez. Missing 1A. Yeah, 1A too much, and this team would be like Atlanta United rolling.
Yes, exactly. Well, and Stephen Caldwell and the TSN kept saying Atlanta, so nonetheless, but Atalanta.
Well, if you say really quickly, it's kind of Atalanta. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, exactly. The 3-0 win over Everton, kind of disappointing for the Evertonians, but I think that's a club that had another exciting return back to Europe there. But the story of the day in terms of on the field to me was Milan, who I think put a marker down 5-1. Obviously, they're playing, a lesser side, but I think that when you look at the amount of money that Milan put forth into the offseason and sort of where they've been for the last few years, you have to put them as your favorite to win the Europa League this year right now, at least in early days. And then the last thought on the Cologne thing, I did like this idea. They only had the 2,900 tickets. So the way that they distributed them was anyone who had been a season seat holder, a season ticket holder, a member, as they say over there, for 20 years or more, those are those people that got priority to go. And I think that was a really fair and great way to allocate that limited amount of tickets to give it to the longest serving and most loyal fans that were out there. And I do like that.
You want to say that because if the case happens in Major League Soccer in the next few years or Toronto's in the MLS Cup and it's away, you'll be one of those because you've been following this team forever.
I'm a day oneer. Bought my tickets in 2006. All right, Kevin, let's take a break. Good games of the week.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at Soccer Today SPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
And we are back. As you know, in the games of the week, there's two leagues that we usually focus on, Major League Soccer and the Premier League. Which one you want to start with, Duane?
Let's start with the Premier League, I guess. What's jumping out at you, Kevin? Of course, we have one today, Bournemouth and Brighton today, which is kind of it's a South Coast derby. But going from there, what's jumping out at you?
Let's go Brighton for today. It's going to be interesting. But Bournemouth as well. A reason to cheer for Bournemouth if you are Canadian. Michael James Walsh, if you are a savvy on social media, you're probably friends with him on Facebook, a young Canadian product that has signed with the Bournemouth Academy. So maybe there's that aspect, and maybe you should cheer for Bournemouth. For Bournemouth. I don't pronounce those names well, you all know. I used to say Leicester for the longest time. So Bournemouth. You do have a kind of a quiet weekend, but games for me, it's Sunday. It's Chelsea-Arsenal, the London Derby in Stamford Bridge. Chelsea turning things around after losing the first game of their season. I am getting excited for this game on Sunday morning.
Fair enough. If you ever see a Shire at the end of a name, just drop it.
They never say the Shire. Say it. Just don't say it. It's a Shire.
And they kind of just slur their letters together. Basically, that's how you speak English. All right. Actually, that game today is interesting in the sense that is it a derby? I mean, this is two clubs that haven't really played each other a ton over the years, but and they're both South Coast. So in the sense of the current Premier League, to have two South Coast teams playing pretty decent football at the same time is kind of a unique situation. So it's the South Coast derby, and I've been to both Brighton and Bournemouth. So this is maybe it's a Duane derby. There you go. All right. Nonetheless, I think there's a lot of people in the world that have been to both, so I'm not really special that way. Moving forward, though, in terms of the Saturday schedule, when you look at it, there's not a lot of marquee matchups. I'll obviously be watching Watford City to see if City can continue its strong play over their 9-0 the last two games they've been out. So hard to really go there. Maybe Leicester Huddersfield might be your best matchup of the day in terms of the way Huddersfield started the season. They lost the game against West Ham basically on a fluke. I don't know if you saw the goal West Ham scored. It was an own goal. It deflected badly and went in very late in the game. So a bit of bad luck for Huddersfield there to sort of otherwise tarnish their tough start. We'll see if Liverpool can bounce back against Burnley. Burnley's they're not going to give up a lot. They're not going to get forward a lot, but they're not going to give up a lot. So that's kind of interesting to see if Liverpool can break that one down. But Crystal Palace under the new manager, that's your early game. That's maybe the worst early game of the year. I might have to sleep in. But
yeah. Palace, Southampton. Roy Hodgson, former manager of the England national team, Aston Villa, and so on and so forth, like 1,000 team. But Crystal Palace with the new manager versus Southampton. You're right. Sleep in tomorrow morning.
All right, but of course Sunday is super Sunday. Chelsea, Arsenal, United, Everton. Wowzer.
Yeah, Rooney's returned to Old Trafford to face United the first time in 15 years? So no, that is a story there. Will they bounce back from their terrible showing in Europa League? Will United continue their top of the league form? Yeah, it is quite an interesting Sunday. Chelsea, Arsenal. Arsenal needs some markers as well in the league because it's going to be a tough one to win. It's going to be a war of attrition. Who's left standing at the end, not losing? Because we all know how Premier League works. 1 or 2 defeat could be enough, depending on who you lose to get you out of the conversation for a title. Because, well, it's a balanced league. It's a tough schedule. And it's coming quickly, especially late, and especially in the holidays. So, anyways, this Chelsea-Arsenal game is more important than any other game, I feel, at this stage of the season, because one of those two teams is going to lose 3 points, maybe, to a direct competitors in a Champions League spot.
Yeah, and look, Chelsea lost that opening game too, so they're already a loss down. You look at the play of your other contenders, and you go, well, you can't afford to drop points even this early. The idea that there's weeks off in the Premier League if you want to win a title is it's just ingenuous. There aren't. You need to be on every weekend, and this is a huge game. It's a huge game early. The United Everton game is big for different reasons for either side. Everton hasn't been playing great since a decent first game, so they need to get back on the trot. Obviously, the narrative, #narrative, will be about Rooney, but really, this is about Everton needing points. And for United, they dropped their first points of the year last week against Stoke. There was a lot of not criticism, but a lot of comments that their hot and outstanding start was really based on schedule. So this is one of those mid-level matchups that they might look at and go, okay, well, this is how, if we can put a stamp, put a marker down here against a team the size of Everton and the quality of Everton, then we really are a championship contender. But if they go in and they drop points to Everton or lose to Everton, then I think people quite rightly could say, well, the start was nice, guys, but look who you were playing. So it is an interesting weekend. And, the Rooney stuff adds a little #narrative to it. Obviously, if he scores, the whole question will be, will he celebrate? Spoiler alert, he won't. So that'll be the whole topic there. But nonetheless, it'll be fun. Sunday should be a good day. Maybe Saturday's a day to sleep in, unless you're a fan of those clubs. But you know me, I won't anyway.
And Sunday in Major League Soccer will be quite terrible game, so you might as well just focus on Major League Soccer Saturday. You mentioned earlier on the show Atlanta United Orlando. Saturday, 3:55 p.m. I don't know why 55, but it's at 3:55 p.m. Eastern Time.
Yeah, and look, that's I'm looking forward to that one. I want to see, take the time. I've watched highlights, I've watched a bit of the games there so far, but to have the opportunity to watch it as a standalone where I can focus only on it, I think is something that's going to be interesting for that. The rest of the schedule is, they look at the Canadian teams first. Montreal, this is a must-win. It's a cliche generally when you say it, but no, this is a must-win. You lose against Minnesota, even draw against Minnesota, lights out. Last one out, turn out the lights type thing. I'm not trying to be an anti-Montreal fan when I say that. I think that's just logic.
I've been saying this all week. 21 points left up for grabs for the Impact. They need 15, in my opinion, to be able to overtake the Red Bulls or Atlanta. Atlanta's going to be difficult, so you hope for a few losses for the Red Bulls, but they do have an easier schedule than the Impact. But that being said, you need 15 points out of those 21, which means 2 games that you can maybe lose for the rest of the season if you win the other ones, and that's a big if. So you kind of maybe have a 2 games margin of error if you can produce goals in the other ones. Montreal, Minnesota should not be one of those games that you allow yourself to lose, because there's 2 of those games remaining against Toronto. So Montreal needs, I believe, a combination of between 10 to 15 points, and losses above them in the standings would be the Red Bulls or Atlanta. I don't see it happening for Atlanta the way they're rolling, but the Red Bulls, it could happen. But Montreal needs those points regardless, and it has to start tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Vancouver, Columbus. That's a decent measure. Playing against a team, the 2 teams that are quite hot. So that is maybe your best matchup of the week in terms of competitiveness. Toronto, LA, obviously, is the other one. The late game there, as Rudy said in the interview, you have Josie and Seba staying home for this one. Partly to rest, partly to rest what was not really injuries per se, but kind of moments where, Josie's hamstring felt tight, so they took him off because the game was well in hand. Seba is made of glass, apparently, so they took him off to make sure that the glass stayed okay. They learned, TFC learned its lesson in that run against Seattle. Had Seba been full fit in that MLS Cup final, I'm pretty sure they find a goal, but they need to protect that moving forward. This is, to me, this game against LA, it's an interesting one because they have those 2 players missing. It is a banana peel game in many ways because it is a West Coast trip. It is tough to win on the West Coast regardless of who you are. If Toronto is going to break, they're going to win the Shield. I'm not trying to be arrogant when I say that. They are going to win the Shield. They're too far up right now.
It would take an epic meltdown for Toronto to lose, like a kind of meltdown that Philly had late in the season last year. That type of meltdown.
And only the most extreme and irrational TFC hater out there, I'm sure there is someone in the Impact fan base there that has a whole bunch of like clown voodoo dolls that they keep poking all the time that truly does believe that they're going to collapse. But only that person that is sticking pins in the clown voodoo doll right now actually thinks it's going to happen. So nonetheless, but what isn't a sure thing is the record. And ironically, I think that this game is going to determine whether they break that record or not. If they come out with 3 points against LA, the team that holds it, that's why it's irony, I guess. I don't know. Is that really irony? I'd have to talk to Atlantis about that. They will decide, if they get 3 points out of this, I think that they probably will get it. If they don't, then it's going to be a bit more touch and go. They're going to probably need to win out for it at that point. Any other games jumping out at you, Kevin?
Quickly in Major League Soccer, they're not that they're duds, but they're Dallas, Seattle, Kansas City, New England, Chicago, DC, Colorado, New York, or maybe Salt Lake, Portland could be an interesting game that has some standings implications in the Western Conference. San Jose Houston, the Zombie Quake Derby is always a game that's interesting to me to keep an eye out for. And the Red Bulls Philly, if you're a Montreal fan, you're cheering for Philly on Sunday.
All right, so not to belabor this for Impact fans, but if the Impact were to lose to Minnesota and TFC were to beat LA, that would then in fact mean that Toronto could clinch the Shield with a win over Montreal on the 20th. So that's something to look forward to. All right, Kevin, on that note, I'll let you, as always, say goodbye.
You can follow Duane on Twitter at 24th Minute and myself at Kev Laramee. Tomorrow, stay tuned to our social media accounts if you want to have an idea of what we are thinking while we are watching games. And if you are a French listener, tomorrow night, Sur la Transversale is back after the Montreal-Minnesota game. And as always, I'm Kevin Laramee, and have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
All right.
I, of course, said that wrong. It's if New York loses to Colorado. But anyway,
Nobody
regardless,
notices.
nobody will notice. All right, I got to go. Bye.